Okay, let's do this. So I've actually wanted to make this video for a while, but I have been a little bit distracted. But now I actually have the time to sit down and do this. So I've been working as the science writer at Carbon Brief for over 5 years now. I actually had my 5-year anniversary in November. Basically, for the entire time I've been working there, I've been doing a lot of stuff on the lack of diversity in climate science. And I just thought it might be interesting to sit down and actually just pull all of those threads together in one place. I guess it all starts a few months after I joined Carbon Brief. I joined in 2020, the end of 2020. And in 2021, Carbon Brief decided to run this feature week on the topic of climate justice, which is this idea that the richest and the most powerful nations on Earth are responsible for the majority of emissions, so the majority of warming. And then the poorest and the most vulnerable people, which is often women and people from the global south, they produced very few emissions, and also they face the majority of the impacts of climate change, the heat waves, the floods, the droughts, the damage to their property, all of that kind of stuff. So the topic of climate justice is huge, and you can't realistically cover it all in one article or even a series of articles, but I think my colleagues and I gave it a pretty good shot. These articles are all a little old now. They were published in 2021, but I really think they are still worth a read if you're interested in this topic. As the science writer, I decided to look into the academic publishing system because that's kind of the cornerstone of science, and to look at who is actually producing all of this research that we, the academic community, the journalistic community, scientific community, that we are actually using. I looked at the 100 most highly cited climate science papers that were published between 2016 and 2020, and I analysed the authors of those papers. Maybe not surprisingly, the vast majority of the authors were men from the global north. So 90% of the authors were from the global north, that's Europe, North America and Australia, and only 10% from the global south. I think about 7% were from Asia and half of those from China, which is actually quite a high research output country. Now, just a quick note on definitions. I'm going to be using the term global south a lot in this video, along with developing and less wealthy, and I'm going to be using these quite interchangeably. None of these are perfect terms. They're kind of these very broad, sweeping ways of describing a large group of countries, which will have very different histories and cultures and economies. This here is Carbon Brief's definition of what the term Global South means. But even internally within Carbon Brief, there's been a lot of discussion about which countries to include and not include in this definition. And so the analysis was really cool, and it actually got a lot of media attention, like the BBC picked it up and the Lancet podcast. But the part that I found interesting wasn't actually the numbers. It was talking to people. I talked to over a dozen different scientists from all around the world about the barriers that they had faced in conducting and publishing research, and I had some really good conversations with them. And the part of the article that I find really interesting was where I dig into all of those problems. My analysis looked at both the gender component and the geography component, so why men are publishing more and why people from the global north are publishing more. But for this, I'm just going to focus on the global north, global south dynamic. So there are a ton of barriers for global south scientists who want to publish in these big, high-impact journals. I kind of split these barriers into two categories. So there's the producing the research bit, and then there's the writing it up and getting it published bit. So just to focus on that first bit for a second. The first, maybe most obvious barrier is money. So conducting research is really expensive. Countries in the global north tend to dedicate a lot more of their GDP towards research and development than countries in the global south. So, for example, around the time I wrote this article, the UK government pledged £1.2 billion towards the UK Met Office's new supercomputer. So this funding discrepancy actually means that a lot of research about developing countries isn't produced by scientists from those countries. It's produced by scientists in the global north. So one way for scientists to kind of overcome this divide is to partner with research institutions in the global north, like to form collaborations. And collaborations have been on the rise recently. And they can be really productive. They can produce really good outcomes. Some of the scientists I was chatting to told me that these global north, global south collaborations often end up meaning that field staff from the global south countries, they go out and do all of the data collection, all of the hard manual stuff. And then the data is sent back to researchers in the global north who do the analysis. But usually collecting data isn't enough to get your name really high up on a publication list. Some of the scientists that I chatted to described the working conditions between global north and global south scientists when they do these collaborations. So one of them said that the northern scientist often brings his or her own grad students from the north, and they tend to view their local partners as facilitators. So logistic, cultural, language, admin, rather than scientific collaborators. So there is actually also this dynamic where global north scientists basically fly over to global south countries, collect data, do their research, and then just fly out again without even contributing to the local economy or the local scientific capacity. And this is known as helicopter science. It can also be known as colonial or parachute science, because these global north researchers are like parachuting in, collecting data, and then just like leaving again. Okay, so once you've then collected your data, done your research, there's still the process of actually writing your research up into a paper. The process of writing and publishing a paper is actually really complicated. One of the experts who was chatting to me told me there's this huge skills discrepancy between the global north and the global south, because scientists from the global north receive all the training on how to write a good paper, or maybe good is the wrong word. They receive training on how to write a paper that the journals will accept. It's probably worth noting that the journals that I analysed were all English language journals. Now, the fact that English is the only language I speak is definitely one reason for this choice, but the other reason is that most highly cited papers are published in English language journals. Journals have this number called an H-index, which basically says how many times the papers published in them are cited. These numbers are shown in this table here, and you can see that the English language journals have much higher numbers than the other languages. This means that the vast majority of people do want to get their research into an English language journal if possible, preferably something with a really high number like Nature. If you want to publish in one of these top-tier journals, your research needs to be in English, which obviously is not the first language for a lot of people who are looking to publish. And so you either pay a lot of money to get your paper professionally translated, or you kind of write it in, well, in some cases in quite broken English, and then often peer reviewers will pick up on that and say that the paper's not good quality because the English isn't good. One other expert told me something I thought was quite interesting, which is just about the way that different cultures write, like the cadence of writing. She said that Spanish has this much more flowing and descriptive cadence than English. And so if you translate something word for word from Spanish to English, it's going to come out sounding different. Another problem that some of the experts told me about is the accessibility of literature. So when you write a paper, you need to cite relevant research, right? And a lot of wealthy institutions have paid all of the journals a lot of money to get access to their research. A lot of Global South scientists don't have that. And so one of the experts I was chatting to, she is an editor on a journal. She said it's often really obvious when a scientist doesn't have access to relevant literature because all their citations are really, really old. Okay, so then I guess this is the most important part of the whole video. There's this question of why diversity even matters. One could argue that science is objective and fact-based and non-biased, and that it shouldn't really matter who is conducting the science, and that I'm just being woke. I would argue, though, that it is very important, and I also have lots of experts that I spoke to for this piece who back me up on that. Lisa Schipper, she told me that it is a fallacy to say that science is neutral and that we're not influenced by other things in our lives. We, scientists, get our training and so on, but worldviews, perspectives that we have, and our social cultural baggage influence the way that we understand what we're looking at. I think that sums it up quite nicely, but if you're still unconvinced, Dr. Farhana Sultana also gave me a really great quote. Hi. Knowledge production and circulation are skewed and incomplete, and this distorts and impoverishes public discourse on important topics. So I did this analysis pretty early on in my career, like within the first year of my career. I kind of decided after doing it that I wanted to help in some way. I thought at least I could fix my own writing, and so I kind of resolved to include more Global South scientists in my own writing. So I kind of started making this list on my computer of the Global South climate experts who I knew were good, and asking other people to give me suggestions, and then eventually I made this little Google form to send around to scientists to help me get suggestions. And this little list on my computer grew, and slowly other people at my company started asking, oh, Aisha, do you have anyone in your list for this topic or that topic? And I was like, okay, this is a problem that all climate journalists have. It's not just me. So I ended up collaborating with the Oxford Climate Journalism Network, which is like a subsidiary body of Reuters, and specifically with Diego Arguedas Ortiz. And so we made this Google form, and we encouraged Global South climate scientists to fill it out. And it included a lot of their details of their institution and the languages they spoke and their area of expertise. Diego and I, and like a couple of other people who helped us out, we've all manually checked every single one of these entries. And so within 1 year of launching the database, we had more than 1,000 people on it, which is really cool. The Global South Climate Database is a publicly available, searchable database of scientists and experts in the field of climate science, policy, and energy. And the database aims to ensure that journalists from all over the world can contact climate experts from Asia, Africa, the Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So there you have it. It currently has 1,087 experts from 122 countries. All the experts on the database are the nationals of at least one Global South country. Some have dual nationality, so they also are affiliated with institutions in the Global North. So some of those 122 countries are from the Global North, but still pretty good, I think. There are 86 languages spoken on the database, so Spanish, Hindi, and French are the most common. Everyone on the database speaks English. And everyone on the database also had the opportunity to do some media training. So we actually managed to get one of the people who did some of the media training for IPCC scientists to run a special session for the Global South Climate Database cohorts. And so a lot of them attended that live. And for the new ones who are joining now, we have a video for them to watch. So everyone is media trained. I think it's quite cool. And I hope that people will use it. That's probably all that Mowgli is going to let me say on this topic. He wants the rest of his dinner, so I'm going to go give him the rest of this dinner. Okay, say bye.